Hello conservationists, welcome to Chapter 6, Mass Extinctions and Global Climate Change with Mrs. Bose. So this chapter marks the second part of the book, looking at threats to biodiversity. So for the next few chapters, these will be some dark times, but it's important to understand the threats to biodiversity before you can fix them, right? Great, so most species' lifespan is about 1 million years on average that you'll see them present in the fossil record. Some are longer, so these guys are horseshoe crabs, and they've been around for almost 200 million years, which is pretty cool. They, just like lobsters, have blue blood because of copper in their hemoglobin, which is pretty cool. And they could be around for so long because they are well adapted to their niche, because they don't have very many predators. They've got some body armor, as long as they're not shedding. They have surpassed the average. Okay. So we've hit this a little bit already, but mass extinctions are these widespread rapid declines in life on Earth, like 60% plus of species go extinct. And so you see at each of these arrows a drastic drop of the number of families. So that's not species, that's a little broader. You can see 5, and we discussed how we're currently in the 6th extinction at this point, which is human-led or anthropogenically caused. But what you notice right after a decline is that there's a rapid increase again. So all of these niches that open up cause us to see rapid speciation. And by rapid, I mean within thousands and thousands of years, not months or years. Cool. So how do we determine extinction rate? It's hard for us to say exact extinction rates because it's hard for us to say if something is for sure extinct, right? You'll see these studies where, oh, we found this one individual of a species that we thought has been extinct for years, and it's still there. We just couldn't find it. On the other hand, we haven't described most species. So if you haven't even listed a species as being present, you don't really notice if it goes extinct, right? So in this figure, you've got the date, years, and then cumulative extinction events, so they add up. So what you notice is over time, each of these categories of animals go extinct at higher rates, right? That correlates with human population rates, that correlates with the Industrial Revolution and our ability to use resources at a greater rate, and it's estimated that the extinction rate is 53 times higher due to people. So, let's talk about climate change. It's still debated in the U.S. as far as a political issue, but as a scientific issue, it's not debated. It's huge consensus, and other countries don't even really discuss it as anything other than, we have to fix this. Our climate is changing. The average temperatures are going up. We'll see that some areas rise greatly, some less. But what we see about this is this change in variations of weather patterns. We'll see a few examples. So one big one is precipitation. So this is, I believe, Syria and then England, where we'll have these more intense droughts and more intense rain periods in areas. And so one of the reasons that Syria had so many refugees and there were so many issues is because it underwent a huge drought, which meant all the people who are farmers couldn't grow food, so they had to move to the city. So you had all this unrest in the city area, and no food coming in a drought, which caused conflict. So we think that climate change is in our head something that we'll have to deal with later, and it might be bad later, but it's already causing issues for people all over the globe. If you don't know who this is John Oliver, and he's pretty hilarious. His quote is about how even if you don't believe in climate change, it's not really a belief, it's scientific evidence. As we talk about all sciences, I don't believe or not believe in something, I just don't accept or I deny this scientific evidence. So why is this happening? Well, it's because of gases called greenhouse gases, where heat comes in, and normally some of it gets bounced out, and then some gets reflected back in. And when you have extra greenhouse gases, they trap more of that heat in and less escapes. So what are those gases? CO2, carbon dioxide that we breathe out, water vapor, and methane, CH4. So methane is a very simple carbon molecule. It is produced when we transport coal, oil. A big one is from trash piles. So when you have this big pile of trash that starts getting broken down, microbes in there will produce methane. That's a big one. We'll look at more that make that too. So they reflect heat back to the earth, and so that's acting like a greenhouse. So here in this map you can see where the largest changes are occurring. You can see actually in the south it's cooling. So sometimes you'll see there was an article published that said we're gaining ice caps in the south, so we're cooling, and there's not really a problem with greenhouse gases and the sea levels rising, but we're losing ice in the north much faster than we're building it in the south. And so what happens is all this ice that was above water on land melts and goes into the ocean and causes the sea level to rise, which is not good. And so this is looking at our level of carbon dioxide over the years. And you can see right at the Industrial Revolution up, we have increased our productions dramatically. So in general, plants doing photosynthesis, taking in carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, should equal the rate of release when we do cellular respiration, like breathing. But because we take out that organic material, we take out all these trees that are doing this process, and we burn them, which releases the carbon dioxide, we're increasing the levels of carbon dioxide. This is a cow. Cows, when they fart, produce methane. So they're one of the greatest producers of methane. But fun fact, if you feed them sea kelp instead of corn, 10 times lower methane production. So there are things that we can be doing. And kelp is really cool. I've listened to a couple fun podcasts on it. It's really sustainable to grow. So now let's discuss the ozone, because it's oftentimes confused with greenhouse gases. The ozone is a layer of O3, 3 oxygens put together. And so it moves over seasons. Part of the time it's thicker and thinner in areas, depending if you're spring or winter. And what it does is that O3 in the atmosphere absorbs UVB radiation. So these are like the rays that cause wrinkles and cause us to burn our skin. So if there's less ozone, you're more likely to burn. And the way that we've affected this is by producing CFCs, these chlorofluorocarbons. And so sometimes otherwise known as freon. So what they do is they come break up that ozone molecule. And when you break up 2, you turn into 2 oxygen gas molecules, which we like because we breathe them in, but they don't help us with the ozone. They don't form the ozone, they don't absorb UVB. So they were invented by this guy named Dr. Thomas Midgley Jr. And Bill Bryson's History of Nearly Everything goes into this pretty well, but he wanted to do good in the world. And so the first thing that he made was leaded gasoline, which helped cars work better, except caused lead poisoning and put lead in the atmosphere, which had a lot of negative results for neurological function, and they even found higher crime rates in areas. But so he tried to do good there. Didn't happen. And then he made the CFCs for cooling. And so he helped people keep things cool. But that broke down the ozone layer. So he was like the least lucky guy. He just wanted to help the world and make these great discoveries, but he just found things that harmed our environment. They say that there's no scientist that has done more harm to our atmosphere than him. So we've looked at these topics big picture. Now let's look at specific issues that climate change causes in species. So a lot of things that happen, like thinking about spring and when things bloom, certain flowers bloom before others. Part of that is based on temperatures. Heart based on day length. Okay, so in your brain you have a gland called the pineal gland, which produces melatonin. So when you have blue light input, that's inhibited, and you're awake. And then when you get less blue light, it's uninhibited, which means you produce melatonin and you get sleepy. So it gives your body that 24-hour circadian rhythm of wake up, go to sleep. And I can go on about this forever because it's really interesting. But one way that can affect creatures is they breed based on day length, not based on temperature. So there are short day breeders like this moose or deer. So deer go into rut in November as the days are getting shorter. And then so you're more likely to see them, you're more likely to hit them with your car because they're looking to mate. So that they'll have their babies in spring, early summer when there's lots of food, right? Long day breeders like weasels only start reproducing, being reproductively active when the days get longer. So they have a shorter gestation period. Then they'll have their offspring at the same time about as the short day. Elephants are pretty cool. The females go into estrus after like really good conditions. And so it takes 2 months for them to get pregnant because they have this like fake ovulation and then they have the real one. And then 22-month gestations mean that they have their babies about 2 years exactly after they had good weather. So like in a rainy season, and they would hopefully see that again. Where this can cause issues is that plants and pollinators might not be on the same cycle. Day length affecting species like the snowshoe hares that are white during the winter to blend in and brown during the summer. They might have changed color yet, but there's already the snow gone, so they're like really easy pickings. Another issue you could have with droughts is fires. So we started that whole Smokey the Bear, don't have forest fires, they're bad. Well, it's not good if you start a forest fire, but fires are important disturbances like we looked at in a previous chapter. So what they do is they take organic material and release it so we can have new growth. They can have these different species growing in this new growth area. And so if you suppress fires and you have all these droughts, you can have these really strong fires like we've been having in California. So here's a controlled burn where they're checking out plots to see succession and what plants come up right after. They'll do controlled burns in several areas so that they can keep too much debris from building up. Another issue is bark beetles like the ash borer. So if there's a longer warm period, they can have 2 reproductive cycles and they can go further north. Okay, so in the future we're trying as a world to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, but they're still rather high, and the U.S. is responsible for a lot of those. And the climate is continuing to change. So things that you can do would be things that you can help decrease your carbon footprint or the greenhouse gases you're emitting. So you can use less electricity, turn lights off when you're not in the room, turn your heat a little bit less warm, your air conditioning a little less cold, drive less, carpool, recycling, and consuming less. So recycling or reusing, consuming less is huge here. We're in a society where we buy things for one-time uses, right? Your coffee filters, all your food you buy in these big packages that you throw away right after you're done, right? That makes people a lot of money in industries, but it is terribly unsustainable. It's harmful for the environment. It costs us more money. It's not a great thing. So one thing that I'd like you to think about doing is being more mindful of what you are putting out into the world and what you can do to reduce that. Okay? So let's look at some examples. So there's a trash pile. If you compost, like all your organic materials, like we have one in our backyard, we put everything except meat, dairy products, so like all of our vegetable scraps, our eggshells, they all get broken down, then we use those in our garden. There are huge piles of garbage in the ocean where water currents go. So like twice the size of Texas is the one over here that most people know. but there are several garbages where a lot of it is cigarette wrappers. So if you see somebody littering there, try not to let them. And so this is showing organisms there dealing with pollution. Sea turtles can have the parts go around them. They can die. They find plastic bags in their stomachs all the time. So here's an example of how you can reuse using old plastics to grow new plants. So the 3 R's, you've probably heard about them: reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce what you buy, reuse what you have, and then recycle what you can't use again. So try to decrease your garbage next week by a bag, or make some goal that you can reach. If you're interested in this stuff, I highly recommend going to the Story of Stuff. This video here is really great. I show it to my classes oftentimes, looking at how big business has taken resources that they purposefully make not reusable, and where we fit into that cycle. And then I've got lots of smaller videos on different things like water bottles and trash, for example. I highly recommend. It's really interesting. Please check it out. So let's look at what else you can do. If you've never been to a farmer's market, they're great. Local produce where you haven't had them shipped everywhere is awesome. The more that you can grow yourself, get local, it's awesome. We've got chickens in our backyard that give us all the eggs that we need. Pretty cool. Some misconceptions. So people will say, hey, it was warm today, or it was cold today, we had a blizzard, there can't be global warming. It actually makes no worse. It gets us these more extremes. And then it's a normal temperature fluctuation from a natural recovery from the last ice age. We did look at in a previous chapter how there are ice ages in these cooling and warming periods. But the way that it's increasing here is far different than it has in the past. It's going at an incredibly high rate. It's not a big plot. It has a huge effect on us. If you have any questions that I didn't answer, you can check out the Copenhagen Diagnosis. It's got a pretty big section on information. Okay. So now let's look at some legislation here. First was the Kyoto Protocol, which was in 1992 to 2012. You'll notice the green was all signed and ratified and said they'd go with it. The red was signed, but we didn't ratify it, and the gray was people didn't sign. So you'll notice that the U.S. is the only one that signed but didn't ratify. Not ideal. So the next agreement was the Paris Agreement, which happened a couple years ago, which wanted to limit our global temperature change below 2 degrees Celsius, where at this point, our emissions are still too high, even based on the Paris Agreement standards, but over time you're going down lower and lower. And it's where you voluntarily go in and look at your emissions and how to reduce them, and then you help rich countries help poor countries reduce their emissions. And so the U.S. did sign, and President Trump has discussed withdrawing, but the last thing I've heard is that we can't withdraw until 2020 based on the agreement itself. Okay, thanks. Have a great day.